We're now on Daf Tesam and Beis. Choshishin Sheba b'mokom nekev nokav. Right, the bird is pecking away, and it could be that there was a hole before the pecking of the bird, and in that hole, a snake left its venom, its poisonous venom. So we're not allowed to eat the fruit when a hole was exposed, and we don't know what was in that hole. So therefore, why does Rav Huna assume, right, in the case where the wolf grabbed away the intestines and pecked at them and they created a hole, why does he assume that there was no other hole that would have made the animal a treifa before the shechita? Here we see that when the bird pecks and it creates a hole, we're afraid that maybe there was another hole that was there before the pecking and the venom of the snake was left there. Amalei, so Rav Huna responds, Rabbi Abba, Mikam Edamas Yisur L'Sakanta, Sakana Shiny. We're much more careful about Sakana than we are about Isur. So if you want to know whether or not we should worry about maybe the animal's a treifa at the time of the shechita, that we don't have to be machmir because we have a chazaka that says it was not a treifa. But if you're talking about Isur, because maybe you're going to come in contact with the venom of a snake, here we have to be very machmir. And that is Rav Huna. So again, we didn't get to Abaye yet, but very shortly we'll get to Abaye. Amalei Rava. Rava says, I don't get it. How could you make this distinction as in terms of whether we should be choshesh that maybe there was a between sakanta and isura, suffix sakanta l'chumra, suffix isura nami l'chumra, to the same extent that in any situation of doubt about the health or the danger of a certain thing, we always tell be machmir. So too, if you have any doubt about isur, the halacha is suffix isura l'chumra. So what gives you the right to make that distinction, Rav Huna? Amalei Abaye, Abaye says to Rava, what are you talking about? Rava, you're not aware of the fact that we're more machmir in sakana than we are in isura? What happened to you, Rava? Lo shani ben isura l'sakanta? For ilu safek tumushus harabim. If you have a question of isur v'heter, in the case of tuma, and you don't know if there's tumah in rishus harabim, or you don't know if somebody came in contact with the tumah in rishus harabim, the halach is feikotar. So we see that in isur, once we have a suffix, we can be matir. Bilu suffix mayim megulim also. Mayim megulim means that if you leave water exposed, uncovered, we have to worry about poisonous snakes that left their venom there. You can't drink the water. And even if it's a suffix, you don't know, then when in doubt, leave it out. You're not allowed to drink that water. So we see that in suffix, we're machmir in sakana, we're mekil in isurim. If water was left uncovered overnight, it may not be drunk out of concern that a snake might have poisoned it with his venom. Okay, there's a whole issue in Yoredeya and the Gra and the Pischei Tshuva whether this applies in our day. But I know people are very, very makpid on Mayim Megulim. And not only that, just for off the record, especially in Hasidic circles, if you leave a vegetable that was cut and you leave it exposed overnight, you didn't put it in the fridge, throw it out. Just for you, if you're interested. Amalei, I don't know if the Chicagoans have such access to the exposure to the Hasidim. So I'm telling you from a New Yorker, because in New York we got tons of Hasidim. Okay, anyway. And of course, tons of anti-Hasidim, but anti-Semites. Amalei, not that in Chicago is so great. I remember the Nazis in Skokie. I don't know if they're still there. Probably they are. Anyway, Hassam. So Rava wants to reject Abaye. And he wants to say, you know what? You want to prove from the fact that if you have a suffix tuma in Rishus Harabim, where mekil, that's Xeris HaKosov. That's a very unusual case of suffix tuma Rishus Harabim. Hilchas HaGmirle, it's halach l'moshe misina and misota that we derive from sota, right? That just like sota, right? If she was alone with a man that the husband warned her not to be alone with, but it was a place where other people could get access, and you don't know that perhaps she might have had relations, then if it's Rishus Harabim, then the Torah says that she doesn't have to drink from the Meimorarim. This it's Lakula. And the basis for all adinim of Safek Tuma is Sota. So we derive from Sota that a Safek Tuma B'Rishus Harabim is Feikotar. Mas Sota B'Rishus Hayochid. But why don't you look at the classic case of a Sota in a private this. And from that, we're going to extrapolate that Safek Tuma B'Rishus Hayochid is Feikotar. Is Aftu B'Rishus Hayochid. If it's a doubt, then you have to be Machmir. So, in other words, what Rav is saying is that the analogy here should be not to the analogy between a question of Mayim Magulim and suffix Hakon on the one hand and suffix Tuma should not be the suffix Tuma Rabin, because that's Exeris Hakos, it's not similar to Sota, but rather it should be to suffix Tuma Hayoki. Mosim Rav Shimi. So it seems that Rav Shimi is coming to support Abaye from a brisa that says Sheretz Befi Chulda, Bechulda Malechas Agabi Kikro Shel Truma, and Safek Noga, Safek Lo Noga, Sfeko Tar. Now, at this point in the development of the sugya, the Gemara thinks that this case, which we're going to describe in just a minute, falls under the classic rules that govern Safek Tuma. So you have a chulda that's walking on top of loaves of truma, right? Bread is truma in this case. And we don't know whether or not the chulda that was holding on to a sheretz in its mouth, this weasel, it's holding on to a crawling creature, we don't know if it dropped it on top of the kikros, or at least, while it was walking on top of the kikros, maybe it, it bent down a little bit. And the law is sfekotar. And this is going to apply even in Rishus Harabim. But Safek Mayim Magulim is always Achim. So you can't give me the answer, Rava, that, well, Safek Tum Rishus Harabim is Feikotar because of the Halach L'Moshe Misina that we equate it with Sota. Forget about all that. We're talking about Rishus Harabim now. I'm sorry. Scratch that. We're talking about Rishus Hayochid. And yet we were making. One second. I just want to see if he agrees with what I said. Ah, okay. We're missing a little piece of the puzzle, which is going to come up right now around the bend, because how could it be in this brisa that Reb Shimi quotes that if you don't know whether or not the sheretz in the mouth of the weasel came in contact with the kikros shel truma, and therefore is matami the truma, then we could be makil. We have Loch L'Moshe Misina that says in Rishus Hayochid is feikotame. So how is it possible that you would say that here we're talking about Rishus Hayochid and therefore what? Sveikotar? So Gemara answers, Hasam Nami, in that case of a weasel with a loaf of bread, Hilchas HaGemir Lami Sota, Mas Sota Dover Sheish Badas Lishoel, Af hochanami dover sheish bo bas li shoel. Right. So we're dealing with the question of a creature, we'll call it a weasel, and kikro shalechem. None of them are human beings that can ask questions about tuma and decide that. So therefore, it's not similar to the paradigmic case of sota, which is the source for all the laws of Safek Tuma. And that's why we're going to apply the principle that Sveko Tar, that now the Safek is Tar. So you see, and this is Rav Shimi's argument to support Abaye against Rava, that in Safek Tuma we could say Sveko Tar, meaning even though it's Rishus HaYachid, but it's not similar to the paradigmic case of Sota because it's Ein Bo Das Lishael, and therefore we say Sveko Tar. It seems to me that at this point, Abaye has the winning. The doubt concerns loaves which have no intelligence. Therefore, the Halacha Moshe Sinai dictates that the doubt is ruled tar, even in a private domain. So no, I made a mistake. This is not this last line about Dov She'ein Bo Das Lishoel is not a support for Abaye and Rav Shimi, but on the contrary, it rejects the proof of Rav Shimi. So this would actually be support of Rava, because since the laws of Safek Tuma, according to Rava, are governed by the Halacha Moshe Sinai and the analogy and the equation to Sota, since in Sota it's Yesh Bo Das Lishol, but here in the weasel case, in the loaves of bread, it's Ein Bo Das Lishol. That's why we say Sveko Tar. Omer Rav Ashi Toshma. And again, I believe that this is going to be a TKO, that Rav Ashi is going to finally conclude with a great proof that Abai is correct against Rav, and we're more machmir in Safek Sakana than we are in Safek Isur. Tzlochis sheinicha megula. Right? So he left the water exposed. Uba'u matzah mechusa. So what happened? Did an animal come and cover the flask of water? Is tmeah. Why? Shani Omer, I have to assume that Adam Tame Nichnas Hashem V'Kisa. So animals don't usually take covers and put them on top of flasks, but a human being might have done so, and we want to assume that maybe he's a Tame. Now, all this has to do with the Paraduma, because the Mechatas of Paraduma cannot be Tmea, and if it contracts Tuma, you can't use it to sprinkle on a Tame mess. But hinicha mechusa ubo mitzah magula, the opposite scenario, where he covered the flask, and then he comes back and he finds, lo and behold, to his surprise, the covering has been removed. So here we could say that an animal, like a weasel, might uncover because the animal wants to see what's inside and drink the water. If we have reason to believe that there's a weasel somewhere moving around over here that has access to this flask and therefore can uncover the flask. Oh, alternatively, okay. So in the case of chulda, the chulda drinks the water, and then some of the water spits out into the rest of the water that's in the flask. That makes it tameh. O nachash l'divrei Rav Gamliel. Well, what was Rav Gamliel? I forgot for a second. Oh, okay, so that's Rabbi Gamliel equates nachash with a chulda. Oshiyard batal balayla psula. Now, why does dew passel the water? This I don't know. Ah, I see. Because you need Mayim Chaim El Keli in order to mix it with the ashes of the burnt paraduma, and create mechatos for being matayr. So here, the water now is mixed with not spring water, but rather water that fell from Shemayim as dew. Okay, fine. So right now, let's just see where we're holding. There's a brisa, which is being quoted by Rav Ashi, but we don't know why this brisa is at all relevant to our discussion about comparing Suffolk Isur or Suffolk Psul, let's call it ritual law, to a Suffolk Sakana. The Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Matam. Why is it that if you had, on the one hand, an uncovered flask of water, and then you find it covered, and on the other hand, you have the case of a covered, and you find it uncovered, and we're making a distinction between those. Let's take a look on Daf Yud. If you're talking about uncovering, in this case, a flask of water, then you have to be choshesh. Maybe a weasel would have uncovered it in order to get access to the water. But ein darkon lechasos. We don't assume that a weasel is smart enough to cover a flask, and why would it do so? So therefore, we're going to assume in that last case that it's not tummy. But in a case where we left it uncovered and then we find it covered, we have to assume that in all likelihood it was a person who came and covered it, and therefore, if he was tame, he's going to be metame and passel the water. Taima tinicha megula ba matzu mechusa, or mechusa ba matzu megula. The whole question of whether the mayim is possible for mechatos revolves around the issue whether he left it megula and now he finds it mechusa, in which case he assumes that it was a tame who came along and covered it, or the opposite, he left it mechusa, now he finds it megula, which now we assume that the weasel was responsible for uncovering it. Those are the two cases, and the law shifts from one case to the other. But the diak is hamitzah kamoshi nicha. Let's say he covered it, comes back and he finds it covered, or he uncovered it, comes back, he finds it uncovered. Lo tuma ikav lo psula. There's no tuma, and it doesn't passel it for mechatos. Now, what would be in the exact same case, parallel case in sakana? Ve'ilu safek mayim megulim. Let's say I don't know whether or not this water was uncovered or not uncovered. Is asur? We're not allowed to drink it. Shmamino chamira sakanta v'isur shmamino. So the bottom line is that we reject Rava in favor of Abaye, that we're more machmir in a safek sakana than we are in safek tuma, and that will support Rav Huna, who would say that, as a general rule, we go back to the chazaka, and we could rely on a cheskes heter, for example, after the animal was shechted, and now you want to come up with a question, well, maybe, when the wolf came and punctured the animal in its intestines, maybe there was already a puncture there before. No. The animal was with cheskes heter. But in such a situation, Bidiyuk, exactly parallel, with regard to Suffolk Sakana, because you don't know if there was another hole over there besides the hole that was punctured by the wolf, etc., with the tzipar, the bird, and pecking away, and maybe the snake's venom was there. Here we're going to say Suffolk Sakana L'chum. Okay then, so I'll wish you a great Shabbos, and Yirtzeh Hashem, let's see, we're up to Daf Yud. So that means on Sunday we could do Daf Yud Al, Daf Yud Beis, because tomorrow Shabbos we'll do. No, I'm sorry. Tomorrow we'll do Daf Yud, and then on Sunday we do Daf Yud Al. Yirtzeh Hashem. Okay then, and then we're gonna have a double problem in 2 weeks' time because Shavuos is on Friday, and then you have Shabbos, so we're gonna miss 2 days of Daf Yomi. But that's the name of the game. All right, everybody, have a great Shabbos.